Hi, boys and girls. Hi, it's Mr. Chalfant, and we are on our next chapter in our story, Little House in the Big Woods. And this chapter is called Sundays. And here are some questions I have for you. When we think about Sundays, what are Sundays like for you and for your family? For a lot of families, for nowadays, Sundays are kind of a quiet day, or maybe they're days to be around the home or visit family. But for pioneer families, often it was considered a day of rest. Do you remember Mom's um, poem that every day had its work to do, and Sunday was considered a day of rest? Children might get very bored as they were expected to just sit and not play. Parents wanted it to be able to a restful, quiet day, and the kids were expected to not disturb that time at all. They could only sit, and they shouldn't be playing and making a lot of ruckus and noise. So the question here is, what do you do when you get bored? And have you ever gotten into some kind of trouble because of your mischief? In this story, we're going to read what happens to Laura and a story that Pa tells about Grandpa's sled. There's that sled and the pig. You can see something that happened. But I hope the chapter ends well. Here we go. Chapter 5, Sundays. Now the winter seemed long. Laura and Mary began to be tired of staying always in the house, especially on Sundays when the time went so slowly. And many of us are getting kind of tired of being in the house too, right? Every Sunday, Mary and Laura were dressed from the skin out in their best clothes with fresh ribbons in their hair. They were very clean because they had had their baths on Saturday night. In the summer, they were bathed in water from the spring, but in the winter time, Pa filled and heaped the wash tub with clean snow, and on the cook stove it melted into water. Then, close by the warm stove, behind a screen made of a blanket over some chairs, Ma bathed Laura, and then she bathed Mary. Laura was bathed first because she was littler than Mary. She had to go to bed early on Saturday nights with Charlotte, because after she was bathed and put into her clean nightgown, Pa had to empty the wash tub and fill it again with snow for Mary's bath. Then after Mary came to bed, Ma had her bath behind the blanket, and then Pa had his. And they were all clean and ready for Sunday. Boys and girls, they didn't have a shower. They didn't even have a wash tub. They had a wash tub, but they didn't have a bathtub, excuse me. And they might only take a shower once a week. So they would wash their face and their hands and their neck and behind their ears and all that. But they didn't necessarily have a whole bath. And they did this on Saturday night to be ready for the new week to begin on Sunday. And for some pioneer families to be ready to go to church, either at home or at a church. On Sundays, Mary and Laura must not run or shout or be noisy in their play. Mary could not sew on her 9-patch quilt, and Laura could not knit on her tiny mittens that she was making for baby Carrie. They might look quietly at their paper dolls, but they must not make anything new for them. They were not allowed to sew on doll clothes, not even with pins. They must sit quietly and listen while Ma read Bible stories to them, or stories about lions and tigers and white bears from Pa's big green book, The Wonders of the Animal World. They might look at pictures and they might hold their rag dolls nicely and talk to them, but there was nothing else they could do. Laura liked best to look at the pictures in the big Bible with its paper cover. Best of all was the picture of Adam naming all the animals. Adam sat on a rock, and all the animals and birds, big and little, were gathered around him, anxiously waiting to be told what kind of animals they were. Adam looked so comfortable. He did not have to be careful to keep his clothes clean because he had no clothes on. He wore only a skin around his middle. Did Adam have good clothes to wear on Sundays? Laura asked Ma. No, Ma said. Poor Adam, all he had to wear was skins. Now, Laura did not pity Adam. That means she didn't feel sorry for him. She wished that she had nothing to wear but skins. One Sunday, after supper, she could not bear it any longer. She began to play with Jack, and in a few minutes she was running and shouting all through the house. and so Pa told her to sit in her chair and be quiet. But when Laura sat down, she began to cry and kick the chair with her heels. "I hate Sunday," she said. Pa put down his book. "Laura," he said sternly, that means very seriously, "come here." Her feet dragged as she went because she knew that she deserved a spanking. But when she reached Pa, he looked at her sorrowfully, that means he felt sorry for her, for a moment, and then he took her on his knee and cuddled her against him. He held out his other arm to Mary and said, "I'm going to tell you a story about when Grandpa was a boy." And the story that he's going to tell is the story of Grandpa's sled and the pig. So you have to imagine, one of these boys here is the grandpa when he was a boy. That's Pa's dad when he was a boy. And if you can think about it, it may be hard for us to imagine, but your parents and your grandparents used to be little boys and girls just like you guys. Hard for us to imagine, but they were little, just like us. When your grandpa was a boy, Laura, Sunday did not begin on Sunday morning, as it does now. It began at sundown on Saturday night, and then everybody stopped every kind of work or play. Supper was solemn or serious and quiet. After supper, Grandpa's father read aloud a chapter of the Bible while everyone sat straight and still in their chair. Then they all knelt down and their father said a long prayer. And when he said amen, they got up from their knees and they each took a candle and they went to bed. They must go straight to bed with no playing, no laughing, and not even any talking. Sunday morning, they ate a cold breakfast because nothing can be cooked on Sunday. Sunday, again, was considered a day of rest. There must be no work done on Sunday. This is what many pioneer families did. Then they all dressed in their very best clothes and they walked to church. They walked because hitching up the horses was work and there could be no work done on Sunday. They must walk slowly and solemnly, that means very seriously, looking straight ahead. They must not joke or laugh or even smile. Grandpa and his two brothers walked ahead, and their father and mother walked behind them. In church, Grandpa and his brothers must sit perfectly still for 2 long hours and listen to the church service. They dared not fidget on the hard bench. They dared not swing their feet. They dared not even turn their heads to look at the windows or their walls or the ceiling of the church. They must sit perfectly still and never for one instant take their eyes off the preacher at the front. When church was over, they walked slowly home. They might talk on the way, but they must not talk loudly, and they must never laugh or smile. At home, they ate a cold dinner which had been cooked the day before. Then, all the long afternoon, they must sit in a row on a bench and study their lessons until at last the sun went down and Sunday was over. Now, Grandpa's home was about halfway down the side of a steep hill. The road went from the top of the hill down to the bottom, right past the front door, and in wintertime, it was the very best place for sledding down a hill that you can possibly imagine. Well, one week, Grandpa and his two brothers, James and George, were making a new sled. Can you see the new sled that they're making? They're making it out of wood, and those are the runners on the bottom that will go fast right on the snow. They worked at it every minute of their playtime. It was the best sled they had ever made, and it was so long that all 3 of them could sit on it, one right behind the other. They planned to finish it in time to slide downhill Saturday afternoon, because Saturday afternoon they had 2 or 3 hours to play before they would have to go into the house. But that week their father was cutting down trees in the big woods. He was working hard and he kept the boys working with him all the way till dark. They did all of their morning chores by lantern light, and they were hard at work in They were hard at work in the woods when the sun came up. They worked until dark, and then they had their chores to do, and after supper, they had to go to bed so they could get up early the next morning, which was Sunday day. They had no time to work on the sled until Saturday afternoon. Then they worked at it just as fast as they could, but they didn't get it finished just as the sun went down on Saturday night. After the sun went down, they could not slide downhill, not even once. That would be breaking the Sabbath. The Sabbath is considered a day of rest. So they put the sled in the shed behind the house to wait until Sunday was over. All the 2 long hours in church the next day, while they kept their feet still and their eyes on the preacher, they were thinking about the sled. At home, while they ate dinner, they couldn't think of anything else. And after dinner, their father sat down to read the Bible. And Grandpa and James and George sat as still as mice on their bench with their Bible lessons, but they were thinking about the sled the whole time. The sun shone brightly and the snow was smooth and glittering on the road. They could see it through the window. It was a perfect day for sledding downhill. They looked at their lessons and they thought about their new sled, and it seemed that Sunday would never end. After a long time, they heard a snore. They looked at their father. There he is. And they saw that his head had fallen against the back of his chair and he was fast asleep. Then James looked at George, and James got up from the bench and tiptoed out of the room through the back door. George looked at Grandpa, and George tiptoed after James, and Grandpa looked fearfully at their father, but on tiptoe he followed George and left their father snoring in the chair. They took their new sled and went quietly up to the top of the hill. They meant to put the slide down just one time. Then they would put the sled away and they would slip back into the house to their bench before their father woke up. So James sat in front on the sled, and then George, and then Grandpa, because he was the littlest. The sled started. First it went slowly, but then it went faster and faster. It was running, flying down that long, steep hill, but the boys dared not to shout to wake up Father. They must slide silently past the house without waking their father. There was no sound except the little whir of the runners on the snow and the wind rushing past. Then, just as the sled was swooping toward the house, a big black pig stepped out of the woods. He walked right into the middle of the road, and he just stood there. The sled was going so fast that it couldn't be stopped. There was no time to turn it. The sled went right under the hog and picked him up, and with a squeal, he sat down right on top of James. And he kept on squealing long and loud and shrill. Squeal, squeal. They flashed by the house, the pig sitting in front, then James, then George, then Grandpa at the back, and they saw their father standing in the doorway looking at them. They couldn't stop. They couldn't hide. There was no time to say anything. Down the hill they went, the hog sitting on James and squealing the whole way. At the bottom of the hill they stopped. The hog jumped off James and ran away into the woods, still squealing. The boys walked slowly and solemnly up the hill. They put their sled away. They sneaked back into the house and slipped quietly to their places on the bench. Their father was reading his Bible. He looked up at them without saying a word. Then he just kept right on reading, and they studied their lessons. But when the sun went down and the Sabbath day was over, their father took them outside and gave them each a spanking. First James, then George, then Grandpa, for disobeying. So you see, Laura and Mary, Pa said, you may find it hard to be good, but you should be glad that it isn't as hard to be it isn't as hard to be good now as it was when Grandpa was a boy. Did little girls have to be as good as that? Laura asked. And Ma said, it was even harder for little girls because they had to behave like little ladies all the time, not only on Sundays. Little girls could never slide downhill like boys. Back in those days, little girls had to sit in the house and stitch on their samplers. That is, they had to do little handiwork. Now you run along and you let Ma put you to bed, said Pa, and he took his fiddle out of the box. Laura and Mary lay in their trundle bed and they listened to the Sunday hymns, that is, the Sunday music that Pa was playing on his fiddle. For even the fiddle must not sing the weekday songs on Sundays. Rock of Ages, cleft for me, Pa sang with the fiddle, and then he sang, shall I be carried to the skies on flowery beds of ease, while others fought to win the prize and sailed through bloody seas. Pa's singing a special song that he knows. Laura began to float away on the music, and then she heard a clattering noise, and there was Ma by the stove getting breakfast. Laura didn't even realize that she'd fallen asleep, and now it's already the next morning. It was Monday morning, and Sunday would not come again for a whole week. That morning, when Pa came in to breakfast, he caught Laura and said that he must give her a spanking. First, he explained to her that today was her birthday, and she would not grow properly next year unless she had a spanking. And then he spanked so gently and carefully that it didn't hurt one bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, he counted, and spanked very softly and slowly. One spank for each year, and at the very last, one big spank to grow on. Have you ever been given spankings for your birthday? That used to be a thing. I don't know if it's a thing anymore. I don't know if I think that's a good thing. Then Pa gave her a little wooden man that he had whittled out of a stick to be company for Charlotte. Ma gave her 5 little cakes, one for each year that Laura had lived with her and Pa. And Mary gave her a new dress for Charlotte. Mary had made the dress herself when Laura thought that she was sewing on her patchwork quilt. And that night, for a special birthday treat, Pa played Pop Goes the Weasel on his fiddle for her. He sat with Laura and Mary close against his knees while he played. Now watch, he said, watch and maybe you can see the weasel pop out this time. Then he sang, a penny for a spool of thread, another for a needle. That's the way the money goes. Laura and Mary bent close, watching because they knew it was the time. Pop, said Pa's finger on the string. Goes the weasel, sang the fiddle, plain as plain. But Laura and Mary had not seen Pa's finger make the string pop. Please, please do it again, they begged him. Pa's blue eyes just laughed, and the fiddle went on while he sang, all around the cobbler's bench, the monkey chased the weasel, the preacher kissed the cobbler's wife. Pop goes the weasel. They hadn't seen Pa's finger that time either. He was so quick they could never catch him. So they went laughing to bed, and they lay listening to Pa and the fiddle singing as they drifted off to sleep. And boys and girls, that's our story for today, Sundays. And our next story is called Two Big Bears. I hope you're enjoying the story. We're going to finish the book next week. And then the following week, we will have another and our final chapter book of the year. Keep reading, keep doing your best work, and have a great weekend. Bye for now.